So on January 8th, 2011, Isla Nadine Coble died, and I knew that the dreams that I had for my child would not come true. Every object in my home, every touch point in my daily routine, every memory that played on the screen in my mind opened and reopened wounds. Facing eternity, I asked, where is my daughter now? And I knew that no pat answer would stand, that what ultimately emerged from the ashes, that would be my true belief. On January 8th, 2011, what I can now frame as lost dreams and as open wounds and as a spiritual journey, at the time it was really resembled nothing more or less than just emptiness. The emptiness of loss. On January 8th, 2011, I buttoned up my daughter's little red trench coat and I sent her outside the farmhouse to play. Outside where her dad and brother were target shooting. And they wore earmuffs and they had their backs turned momentarily. Dean was adjusting something. No one saw Isla hide. Earlier in the day, when Dean had sent Isla into the house, he didn't tell me that she'd been trying to go downrange. When I sent her back outside to play, I didn't tell Dean that I sent her back out to play. Dean shot the target, but nobody knew that Isla was hiding there unseen. And as you can imagine, slowly panic turned to pain as we awoke to what remained. And of course, what remained in large measure was a family. Father, a mother, a son, and also a journey. Now, experts will tell us that grief is a journey. They've identified 5 stages of grief. I personally do not believe that you can short-circuit the process, nor do I believe that any time spent grieving is ever wasted. Lara Honos Webb says that grief is actually a journey from the emptiness of loss to the fullness of loss. She says that after a period of grieving, the emptiness of loss opens up into a fullness of all that ever was and in some mystical sense still is. She says that there are lessons in grief for the life that we are living now. What is the fullness of loss? What does it look like for Dean and I as we grieve? I have 2 short stories. One is how when we lost Isla, the SFA community, the Chinese community here in town, our professional communities, our church family, our extended families, everybody came, everybody reached out, everybody cared. And Dean remarked, he said, there's such an outpouring of love. He said, I think I have put down the world's biggest taproot. I'm not going anywhere. This is my husband who spent years in the Pacific Northwest doing forest inventory work, living out of the back of his truck, never staying in one place more than 2 years. He would always get this vagabond itch and he'd want to uproot and maybe move on. It was a pattern built over a lifetime. But because of loss, community and a connection to place emerged. Another example also with Dean happened more recently. He and his dad were at the farm. They were working together, mowing pastures and burning brush piles. The sun shone on a particularly glorious stretch of hill country, Texas hill country. And as Dean was looking around, he drank in the countryside and he thought to himself, this is the last place where Isla walked the earth. And suddenly, he felt closer to Isla and closer to the farm that has meant so much to the Coble family. So the fullness of loss may be about gratitude coming to the fore and pain receding. It may be something that actually transforms how we look at the world around us. I'd like to say that I think there's a lot of kinds of grief And this talk, actually the title, not global change exactly as in your handout, grief, damn grief, and other worthy companions. And I think what happens is that sometimes we grieve because events over which we have no control unfold around us and trap us, grief. And sometimes we grieve because events which we played a part in unfold around us and trap us just the same, damn grief. And I'll say we're going to transition to climate change as a topic. And for me, I started learning about climate change in earnest in 2008. I started to work on the NASA Earth to Sky project through the course of several multi-day trainings. I went to places where I could hear NASA scientists and other experts present the latest science. And as I listened, I learned, these climate scientists distinguish between things like weather and climate. Weather is what you get, climate is what you expect. Weather is what you're wearing on any given day. Climate is the ratio of lightweight to bulky items in your closet. Weather is a point-in-time phenomenon, but climate operates along the scale of 30-year moving averages. Not only that, because weather and climate can't be conflated, the occasional snow day in Nacogdoches doesn't disprove climate change. And neither does the fact that the climate has always changed disprove the fact that humans are warming the climate system today. James Lawrence Powell says that you can learn everything you need to know about climate change in one graph. Okay, so here it is, one graph. In the foreground, you see a green and gold band. And the data in this line, in this strip, they tell us the two main ways that humans put carbon into the atmosphere. The first is through land use conversion. It's what happens when we eliminate trees and vegetation. The second is when we emit carbon through the burning of fossil fuels, as you see illustrated in gold. The blue band in the middle is the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere over the past 1,000 years. And as CO2 and other greenhouse gases accumulate in the climate system, temperatures rise, as depicted in the red graph in the back. If you look at all three of these graphs, you'll see the steep incline as they get to the 21st century. This rate of change is what worries climate scientists. They say this rate of change in the climate system is unprecedented over tens of thousands of years, including the whole period of human habitation of the planet. Not only that, it's possible to take apart the climate system and look at bits and pieces of it, look at each one by one. So scientists look at things like glaciers, sea ice, they look at sea level or ocean heat content, and what they find is that when they examine the key parts, the fingerprints or the indicators of the climate system, they're all going in a direction up or down that's consistent with a warming planet. So scientists, to be credible, they have to base their conclusions on evidence. And typically they draw conclusions somewhat cautiously. Powell did an inventory of the peer-reviewed climate science articles that were published between November 2012 and December 2013. And he found that there were 2,259 articles published by over 9,000 authors. Of all those authors, only one author rejected human-caused climate change. So the scientific consensus now about this phenomenon is in the 99% range. Andrew Dessler is a professor at Texas A&M. Speaking before a U.S. Senate committee, he recently said that the data that we've collected in recent years lead to an unmistakable conclusion that the Earth is warming. Dessler emphasized that these facts, we hold these facts with high confidence, and that has led me personally to conclude that climate change is a clear and present danger. He said that unchecked greenhouse gas emissions accumulating in the Earth's system over the 21st century would lead to warming of about 4.7 to 8.6 degrees Fahrenheit. and that the upper end of this projected range of increase would herald the literal remaking of our Earth's environment and our place within it. In contrast, let's think about another conservative sector of American society, Admiral Samuel Locklear, who is the chief officer, military officer in the Pacific. He keeps tabs on North Korea, he monitors Sino-Japanese relations, and he also analyzes cyber attacks that are traced to China. He says that the greatest security threat in the Pacific region, the thing that he thinks would create significant upheaval in the future, but he basically said that it's going to be climate change related significant upheaval in the Pacific region that leads to the complete crisis of the security environment in the Pacific region. So let's bring this closer to home and let's think about Texas. We know that in Texas, we've got a state with a majority of red districts and an issue that's divisive along party lines. And so there could be squirming in the audience because you could feel like it's so political to talk about a topic, a science topic like this. Well, let's ask the question, what do Texans think about climate change? Is it real? Is it human-caused? And should we take action? So Stanford University did a poll recently, and they found that 84% of Texans say that climate change is happening. In a Texas focus study, Yale University found that more Texans attribute climate change to human causes than natural causes. Not only that, among those who say that climate change is happening, he said that they agree that things like drought, wildfire, heat waves, asthma, allergies, infectious diseases, and other health problems will get worse because of climate change. More Texans say that they believe that the government should take action. The majority of Texans, the government should take action to address climate change. But even larger numbers of Texans say that citizens and industry should act. And this is probably another key point, finally. A plurality of Texans, what they think about the future is that we should switch to clean energy and that doing so will be good for the economy. So while we have an issue that's very divisive on the national level, we have a majority of Texans who are on board with a clean energy future. Now this topic, you might think about when I grieved, when I lost Isla, what I considered was that every tear was an investment in healing. That I cried and I healed. I prayed and I healed. I received a lot of hugs and I healed. And in some ways, it was as simple as that. But what has happened with climate change is that as I've learned about climate change, it's opened me up to different kinds of hurts and even deeper kinds of grief. So for example, European researchers have said that different parts of our planet system are more susceptible to the impacts of climate change. The places you see illustrated in this map are highly susceptible to impacts like human mass migrations, declines in food production, degradation of freshwater resources, and increases in severe weather disasters. Not only that, but these same researchers, they said, maybe you can call it a tragedy, I frame it as a tragedy, that every year 400,000 people die because of climate change, and it primarily affects children in developing countries. So this is something that does indeed cause grief, and I wonder, these stark realities, if you and I were to think about them for very long, probably we would grieve. It's the kind of thing we hate to see happening in the world around us. But then again, I know human nature, we cast about for culprits. We're looking for some way to sort of offload some of the angst that we would otherwise hold in our hearts. One of the things to be aware of is that the United States is number 2 globally in carbon emissions, but China is number 1. So that seems to kind of give us a sense of we can give ourselves a little off the hook kind of thing. What I want to introduce you to is a statistic called BEAT, the balance of emissions embodied in trade. And what this statistic does is it looks at the effect of global production and consumption on climate change. So in this map, those countries that are net exporters of products that used energy to produce and therefore emitted CO2 into the system, they are shown in gradated shades of red. Similarly, the countries that were net importers of products that emitted CO2 elsewhere on the planet, those countries are shown in gradated shades of blue. So what you see is China very red and the US very blue. So while the US is number 2 in carbon emissions, we're also a huge importer of products that produce carbon dioxide emissions elsewhere on the planet. So in a sense, you could say the United States is a bit of a double whammy. Again, when I think about these kinds of challenges associated with the topic of climate change, it brings me around full circle back to the topic of grief. But the challenge here is for us to think about grief not as emptiness, but as something more and something productive, as something that allows us, when we enter into it, to move from the emptiness of loss to the fullness of loss. So what I want to challenge us is, as experts, scientists raise red flags, I want us to consider that it falls to us now to realize that tomorrow's climate is today's challenge. When problems seem too big for us, when we feel that we're being overwhelmed by the challenges that we face, that we realize, as Mary Piper said, when the problem seems too big, the solution is to grow bigger. So I think for us, we have the opportunity now. This is our moment. There may have never have been a time in human history when the opportunity for us to enlarge our capacity for things like grief, for hope, and for creative endeavor has been so pronounced. I'd like to leave you with a story that stuck with me from my college days. Back then, for 9 months of the year, I was a lowly biology major, but when summer hit, I became canoe woman, queen of the lakes. I worked in northern Minnesota as a wilderness canoe guide for 3 summers, and I slept on the ground, I cooked over a fire, portaged 80-pound canoes, and I paddled those boundary waters, lakes and streams day in and day out. After gripping the paddle for long hours, I would have blisters on my hands, and mercifully, after a while, those blisters would turn to calluses. One night, I was wondering, I don't know, maybe it was the call of a loon or the rush of the water or the crackle of the fire, but I started thinking, what if the human heart responded to irritants the same way my hands did? What if, when things in life chafed and rubbed, our hearts formed a callus? And I wondered what else can happen with our hearts. And I realized our hearts can embrace the irritant. When an oyster gets a grain of sand in between its shell and its inner mantle layer, it secretes a substance that envelops the irritant. Not just once, but over and over again, it envelops the irritant, forming a pearl. So I'd like to leave us with an audacious ask. I'd like to suggest that even if climate change is an irritant, embrace it, even if it brings grief. If some aspect of it tweaks your heart, embrace it, though it brings grief. And then tell others, tell someone something that you've learned about climate change, whether it's today or in previous encounters. Open up and start the dialogue. Embrace the irritant as they come your way. Think about the pearls that can be formed as we collectively do that. And then walk this road with other worthy folks. I would consider it an honor to be part of a future, people looking back saying we were this greatest generation. We took the challenge, we set the stage for our children, to have the best opportunities that they can have in the future. So let's walk this road together. You would be worthy companions.